Thank you for joining us for the Reconfigure Feminist Action Research and Cybersecurity report launch. Authors Julia Schlupska, Scarlett Dawson-Duckworth and Professor Gina Neff are joined by Falami Prihe, activist and founder of Victims of Image Crime. A little housekeeping, we are fortunate to have a varied audience with a wide range of views, and we request the opinions of others are respected in this space. For your awareness, this event is being recorded and will be posted on our website in due course. Post questions using the Q&A tab at any time. These will be answered at the end of the talk. Please keep questions as concise as possible. They will be visible to all attendees and you can upvote them. We will endeavour to follow up any unanswered queries. Please allow me to introduce Gina.
Thank you and welcome. And allow me to bring on my co-panelists. I'm Gina Neff. I'm Professor of Technology and Society here at the Oxford Internet Institute. And it's my great honor tonight to be chairing this session, this panel that we're having to launch the report from the Reconfigure project. I am pleased to see this good crowd that's here with us tonight. And I'll give you just a minute of background on what this project is and how we came to have this report. I'm joined tonight by Scarlett Slupka and Julia, I'm joined tonight by Julia Schlupska and Scarlett Dawson-Duckworth, who are co-authors of the report, along with one of our participants who was really involved in helping shape our thinking around it, Falami Prihe. And the style of tonight will be that we'll hear from Scarlett and Julia presenting a short PowerPoint presentation about the report. And then we'll have Falami kind of bring in her experience as someone who is an activist and works in this space. The report comes out of a project sponsored by UK Research and Innovation to do citizen science. And often when we think about citizen science projects, we think about going out and people making observations in their backyard that help natural scientists, or people wearing wireless sensors or devices, tracking things on their mobile phone that help us understand new things about health. This project started with Julia helping to ask the question, well, what if we did citizen science on cybersecurity? We've had an idea that cybersecurity has a right way to present knowledge and expertise about the right things to do online. What if we actually started to involve people and say, what do you think cybersecurity should be doing? So with that, we're going to hear from Julia and Scarlett. And after we do, we'll turn to Falami, and then we'll have a short set of questions among ourselves, and then we'll answer your questions. Be sure to use the Q&A tab in the bottom of Zoom to pose your questions, and I'll be monitoring those for our conversation. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Julia and Scarlett.
Thank you, Julia, for sharing your screen. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited to present this report today, and we know that, as mentioned at the beginning, you all come from very different perspectives, so hopefully this will be very accessible and clear to you all. The Reconfigure report, so I'm not going to say too much at the beginning. We're going to run through what the project was, how it unfolded, and very briefly what sorts of things came out of the data analysis and findings from a research perspective. So I'm going to hand over to Julia to walk you through the project itself.
Okay, thank you. So Reconfigure started more than a year ago now. And what initially was the driving motivation behind it was, I think, what Scarlett and I identified as a consistent set of pitfalls that cybersecurity research and industry tends to fall into. So Scarlett on the industry side, and I was entering a PhD in cybersecurity. And we found that mainstream cybersecurity narratives, particularly the way cybersecurity is taught to people, can be very condescending or dogmatic. Ideas about kind of the human factor or humans will present people as lazy or uninterested or like bad consumers of cybersecurity that need to be educated on better behaviors. And often cybersecurity focuses on defending companies and militaries rather than people. When people come in, it's their behavior that needs to be changed in order to defend systems. So we wanted to create an alternative space where people could support each other to improve on their cybersecurity practices, make each other feel safe online. And we were very lucky and fortunate to receive a UKRI grant to expand this into a citizen science research project. And the methodology that emerged throughout this project is a kind of participatory threat modeling. So threat modeling, as I think some of you in the audience may be familiar with as a term, is a method in cybersecurity to model what assets, vulnerabilities, or threats to a system might be. But we wanted to expand that to allow people who don't identify as technical experts to define for themselves what threats online might be, and then to empower them to address those threats. Over to you.
And so, thank you, Julia. So out of that project and those ideas and the actual workshops that we ran, partially physically to begin with, and then after the pandemic hit virtually, we were able to meet all of these really wonderful participants who were very keen to share their ideas and thoughts and personal experiences around cybersecurity. I think the first thing that we noticed was that none of these people really conformed to the overarching cybersecurity narrative of the disinterested end user who seems to be, in some terminology, seems to be asking to be hacked because they don't have the right tools, because they don't know where to look, because they're not technical. We found that participants were very thoughtful, just exhibited a lot of care in the way that they thought about their digital lives when prompted, the way they thought about others' digital privacy. So that was a really nice finding and something that really went against a lot of the mythologies that we'd encountered in our experience in cybersecurity spaces in research and industry. Despite the fact that they were very thoughtful and were very keen to learn and to improve their digital privacy, we also, it was clear that there were a lot of barriers to that for the average person. So we picked up on privilege and depression forming barriers to that, and also socioeconomic background, wealth, etc. And also just the general how cybersecurity presents itself, and how experts and people who are deemed to be legitimate cybersecurity people, the way they present cybersecurity to people. So technical jargon, the way everyone within cybersecurity movies, TV shows, and general narratives looks, that makes people feel as though they're not part of that world and don't have anything to do with it. Some of the solutions that participants came up with mostly revolved around community, being protective of each other, sharing experiences and solutions, and building together basically a better privacy online, and also structural change in the form of more responsibility being placed on governments, companies, and legal systems.
And before we go further, we wanted to acknowledge all of the different kinds of labor that went into this project. So obviously there's 4 of us on this panel, but many other people contributed, and their enthusiasm and ideas really made the project what it is. So in particular, our tech support who volunteered, all of the people who contributed to organizing workshops, doing data analysis, Laura Whitehouse for the beautiful design of the report, our project partners, and also on the OII staff side, thank you so much to Flora and Isabel and John and Duncan, all of the people who helped us get this report out and make this event happen today. So yeah, back to you, Gina.
Great, thank you. One thing I want to point out before we turn to Falami is that the link to the report, the downloadable link to the report, is now in the chat. We will also put the link to obtain a printed copy of the report. We're mailing out to the first 30 people we hear from printed copies of the report, and that link will be available. And then we'll also have these in the follow-up email to attendees of this talk. So Falami, you've been a motivational speaker, you're an activist, you're a co-founder, you're a leader. What do you think people need to know about this space?
Based on what happened to me, it was very much a case of, although my cybersecurity presence and my images were shared, it very much made me feel I needed to speak out about it, because I felt that I was in a position of where I couldn't make any changes. I didn't have no ownership of my online presence or my online space. So I set up a support group. It's not a charity, called Victims of Image Crime, to support other people that had gone through the same experience as me. So I found that being part of this workshop and the space was very much about sharing the experiences of people that are affected in this particular way.
Why don't we bring this into a conversation? So, and Falami, if your connection holds to join in audio and join in video, that's great. Otherwise, I have questions here for you as well. One of the things that this study has really focused on is what we can learn from people from their everyday experiences with information security. I'd like to ask each three of you, what do you think we learn when we talk to people about their everyday experiences? And Falami, if I may, I'd like to start with you.
So basically, for me, everybody's individual, as we know. Everybody's experience about, their online experience is all different. For me, it was very much about, having that breached and then trying to protect myself, totally taking my online presence, completely destroying it and taking it away, because I was in a position where I no longer wanted to be part of that online life because of the breach that happened to me. And very much so after that, after setting up the support group Victims of Internet Crime, I then decided I need to have that presence in order to see what I was doing and talking about, and to know that I was there as a support mechanism. So I think it's individual for everybody, and we are all individuals, and how we look at security is individual thing.
Scarlett, do you want to jump in next?
Sure. I think that what we learned from individuals was very much that, or what I said at the beginning, that they do really want to care for their digital security. They want to learn and they want to be empowered, but sometimes it's difficult to create that space in their daily lives to do that. And so to expect an individual to just take on the mental load and the responsibility of figuring out what site's safe, what site isn't, which tools are worth downloading or paying for even. It's a big burden, and it's something that I think that if we come together more with different spaces within cybersecurity, we can figure out how to distribute that better.
Mm-hmm. Julia?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in on the idea of an everyday experience, because I think this is something, in a way, it's at the heart of the project, because a lot of the experiences that people have and brought to the workshops are not, in a way, they're not everyday experiences, right? Like having a image-based sexual abuse, experiencing that isn't necessarily an everyday experience, but it is, it's something that can easily be kind of excluded or omitted in cybersecurity research. So for example, when I wanted to look at solutions to image-based sexual abuse as a form of cybersecurity, I was often told that that's not really a cybersecurity issue. It's more of like a privacy issue or a personal issue. But obviously in companies, when similar things happen, like if someone shares data not authorized, then we kind of create systems to support people, to give them more control over their data. In contrast, I think, and this is something Falami, I think, we've talked about, the response for harms like image-based sexual abuse is to go back and tell individuals you shouldn't be sharing that data, like why are you sharing pictures of yourself? And victim blaming, essentially, which in a corporate context would be preposterous. No one would ever tell a company, like, why are you sharing so much data? Just don't do that. And similarly, I think some of the experiences that people brought to workshops. So for example, imagine if you're a woman who's maybe like retired, who has grandchildren, who's stopped tracking technology developments a while ago, but then you join a group like Extinction Rebellion, and you're worried about, well, you're planning on getting arrested, but you're worried about that if the police go through your phone, that might expose other people in your collective to police surveillance. And so you're coming to a digital privacy workshop to counter that. So to that person and that person doing cybersecurity, it's far from a corporate CISO or like a military general, but there's a really valuable lesson there about how security isn't a solitary thing and it's a collective thing. So I think there is so much to be learned from those people's experiences.
Falame, you wanted to add on to that?
Yeah, I also wanted to say, you know, part of the learning is also about understanding difference. You know, experiences are very much based on morals and cultural background. It makes a big difference based on your culture. You know, obviously you can see I'm a Black woman, so within my community, there's lots of areas that's so to do when it comes to, like, you know, I mean, based on my experience, what happened to me, a lot of people actually said to me, "Well, did you share the pictures?" And you know, and it's those kind of taboos where people are not understanding. It's not about the sharing the pictures. That is not the crime here at all. You know, and for me, it was quite harsh to hear that. And you know, those experiences are part of what molds people. So I just thought it was really important that we need to understand difference and cultural difference when we're talking about cybersecurity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to draw a line and emphasize that, Falame, because to kind of connect some of the themes, right? We have this idea of information security as offering one set of solutions to big organizations, and basically blaming the victim when it comes to individual people. And that, you know, kind of a one size fits all solution is not going to work across different cultures. You know, what we know from research about kids, for example, is they take security very, very seriously. The people they're worried about are their parents. You know, so their kind of position and positionality really shapes who they want to have access to their information, for example. I want to encourage all of you to ask questions in the Q&A box in the bottom. But I have another question for our panel. So based on what we see in people's experiences, what do you think should change in the field of cybersecurity? What is it that we need to be doing?
Yeah, I'm happy to just get the ball rolling on this one. So speaking from the perspective, because I work for a cybersecurity company, so speaking from the perspective of industry, I think that I see in my day-to-day work very clearly a significant chasm between cybersecurity, which I think a lot of people, the kind of cybersecurity that a lot of people think about when they hear that word. So company systems, hackers, malware, ransomware, a lot of money flowing back and forth between these acts of criminality and the systems that the technical experts are trying to protect. And what the, I suppose, threats and mitigations that people face on a day-to-day basis just by using your smartphone, social media, email, sharing pictures, that kind of thing. In my world, in my professional world, very little thought is given to the individual, even at the level of the company. I talk to IT teams all the time who are thinking about protecting their systems and the different laptops and the VPN access and all of those building blocks of their systems, but not about the actual workers that are behind them. I don't think that it's going to be possible really to develop a holistic approach to security on a societal level without reconciling those two worlds. I mean, two worlds is simplifying it, but in general. I don't think that it's going to be possible because especially now and even more, the professional world and the personal world are increasingly interlinked. So, I mean, in the past year, we've all worked from home. We've all maybe used our personal laptops for professional work. I think it's really important to start thinking about the people behind the devices rather than just the systems that we're trying to protect. So I think that needs to change. How to do it is, I think, premised primarily on getting more people in the room and more different kinds of people in the room. And I think that a lot of people don't even know where the room is when it comes to cybersecurity. It's just very inaccessible, very alienating as an environment and as a term. I mean, if you Google, how can I be safer online, you will find all of these listicles telling you which password managers to download, which VPN to get. And very quickly you get drowned in technical jargon. And the fact is that a lot of the solutions that are being provided are given with the mentality of one size fits all, are given with the mentality of the person writing the articles, who isn't necessarily a person who looks like everyone, who has the same experiences as everyone else. So we need people with diverse perspectives. We need people with different experiences to be involved in the process of creating a more secure interconnection of digital devices from the ground up. So we need people designing these technologies with their own unique experiences in mind, because I guess one of the pitfalls of ethical tech and creating technologies to solve social problems is that a lot of the people who are behind those projects don't represent a lot of people who actually are going to use them and who need them to make themselves safer. I think that more collaboration among different actors is really important in that sense. And my company Darktrace having partnered with our project is a really good illustration of a step in the right direction, I think.
Falami, what would you think would need to change?
Well, speaking from a point of view where I talk about, my images, my sexually explicit images being shared by my ex-partner online, and being in a headspace or it being a space where I have no control of the situation or remove them, I think it's more about finding ways to identify and diversify the need of individual experiences, because based on what happened to me, and it's about having ownership as well, because I very much had to go through loops and hoops and contacting different people to get my photographs taken down and the images removed, and there is so many loopholes, and ultimately it's your presence, it's your, so there must be a way where we can take ownership of ourselves and our images and our content online.
Before I ask Julia to come in, I'll just bring up one of the questions from our audience. Charlie Markham asks, do we want companies to take greater responsibility for individual cybersecurity? And if so, how would we pressure companies to adopt that kind of approach or broaden their interpretation of cybersecurity? Julia?
Yep. So I think to answer, I guess there's a couple of things I want to say, but to answer that, I think something that Scarlett mentioned is cybersecurity. I think there's a tendency sometimes to put the cart before the horse and to think of our job as protecting systems rather than protecting people. And I think it would be really valuable for cybersecurity, anyone involved in doing cybersecurity at a company, anyone doing cybersecurity research, to take a step back and ask themselves, who are you defending and who are you imagining as the threat? And maybe be a bit more critical about whether you're defending actors in society who already have a lot of power, which I mean makes sense. Obviously, everyone needs a job, and it's always the case that people who have money are able to hire security in different forms. But I think we can be more critical about it. And I think one method for doing that is reconfiguring what we mean by threat modeling. So threat modeling is often done at the kind of proto stage of security analysis or building in security into systems, where you're deciding what your assets and your threats are. And I think if you can bring in the people that you are hoping to serve or promote into that process and hear what their ideas, not just for what the threats are, but what the solutions are, that is a really valuable step forward. So for example, when we did the workshop with people who've experienced image-based sexual abuse, that's like an awful thing to happen. It shouldn't happen to anyone. But the people who've experienced that and then gone on to become advocates to represent others have such a valuable set of ideas for what solutions in this space should look like. So like Falami was talking about, ownership over data, how to implement that practically. They were coming up with ideas on, for example, cybersecurity, controls over who can access you on platforms, things like filters, that even though I'd been thinking about this for a while, it didn't occur to me as a solution, as a technical solution, because I haven't had that experience. Or thinking, one of the things that was suggested about at the workshop is that porn companies need to more proactively check consent to intimate images that are uploaded, which is actually a solution that Pornhub implemented a few months later due to a lawsuit by survivors of image-based sexual abuse who'd been exploited, and Pornhub on the platform, where I feel like if Pornhub had been, and other sort of adult entertainment companies had been listening to survivors' voices and survivors' ideas for solutions from the beginning rather than dismissing them, then they would have had, they would have been, I don't know if contributing to a safer world online, but at least not contributing to harm and abuse and profiting from it.
If we could design a new, safer online future, what would that look like? Falami, if you're able.
Oh, I'm back. I decided to use another method to contribute.
I've definitely been there.
What would it look like?
What would the future look like?
The future needs to be very inclusive and include everybody. It needs to be onerous to the individual based on their desires and needs, and to make sure that they're safe online. And what I want to be safe online is going to be different to whatever somebody else is thoughts about their onerous of what they deem as being safe. So I think it very much, it has to be done in a collective way, but also we need to be able to take ownership, because I very much would have loved to not be able to go through so many loops and hoops to have my photographs removed. Just been able to make a call or contact one person, but you're contacting several people, and then you've got to wait for them to get back to you. And it's just that in itself, for anybody who's experienced this, is so daunting. Because the first thing experiencers want to do is to remove their content. That's the first thing they want to do. And the processes and the loops that we have to go through at the minute, we need to be in a situation where I can press a button, or I can ring somebody, or send an email and it's done immediately. I want it done, or even so I have access to do it myself. That would be very much something I'd like to see in the future.
Julia, Scarlett?
But yeah, just to add to that, just a small bracket before I move on to the actual question, but building on what Julia was saying earlier, I do think that in terms of companies, often the incentives aren't in the right place, and connecting also to what Falami just said, what companies would consider as their consumers often aren't the actual users that are using the platforms. They're the advertisers that are advertising on them. So I think an idea that came up in one of our workshops was that, why can't you get through to a customer support person at Facebook if you've experienced a security breach or something else has happened to you? Well, it's because you're not the customer. So yeah, I think there is a lot of work to be done in that area in terms of making sure that those incentives are realigned, either from just getting, again, inclusivity, as Falami says, is essential, but also from a legislative perspective. But in terms of what a more a safer online world would look like, I think that Reconfigure is in an interesting position as a project, because we are partially community organizers, intervening directly and trying to improve people's digital security in a practical sense, but also on the research side of things, we're actually trying to contribute to not only building knowledge of a more inclusive knowledge framework, but also the methodology to achieve that. So I think that on the research side of things, and Julia will also be able to speak on this, we want to create a process of research which includes all participants from the beginning, in terms of just the design of the research, and also the analysis of the data that comes from it, so that it's not an abstracted process of the researchers in lab coats looking at the participants through a glass wall. On the more community organizing side of things, I think that what the feedback that we got from participants was that they really appreciated the space that we provided to them to think about digital privacy and share with others. But we also think that that space, it can't be just a transitory thing in people's lives, because it doesn't tend to have the long-term effects that we would want. So in a practical sense, we were thinking about making the workshops more of a recurring thing. So a space that is always there that people can come back to and learn from.
Mm-hmm.
I think to build to build more safety online for a safer online future, I think we can look to a lot of work that's happening to make the online world safer right now that doesn't necessarily get described as cybersecurity, but I think that's what it is. And to build on it more so that we're investing in care rather than control or surveillance. And so what I mean by that is I've been speaking to people who support survivors of domestic violence, like in domestic violence shelters or sexual assault counselors, people like organizations like Glitch or Chain in the UK who are setting up online support systems for people who experience harm. People like Falami who set up peer support networks through Voice, and they're all doing incredibly valuable and incredibly difficult work to rectify harms and to make people safer online. But a lot of the time they are doing that work unpaid or underpaid. Mm-hmm. And when I see, like, it is so frustrating to me how very willing we as a society or as funding bodies are to invest enormous amounts of resources into setting up technical surveillance networks, often in the name of cybersecurity, but then we are not willing to invest resources in people who are doing that care work for other people's safety online. And I think that's what we need to be doing in order to build a more safer online world. And in terms of how that extends into company practices, I think kind of what you said, Falami, about not being able to get a person on the phone, that's something that has come up a lot when I've been speaking to other advocates who support survivors, is that even if you've experienced a really serious harm on Facebook or on Twitter or Pornhub, it's usually impossible to get an actual human on the line. Mm-hmm. Because yeah, like Scarlett said, that's not actually who the consumer is. And so I've been speaking to advocates who are now essentially spending all of their time supporting survivors, helping to get image-based sexual abuse down using Facebook's takedown process, which is essentially they're doing customer support for Facebook, but Facebook isn't paying them for that. And I think in order to provide more online safety, it's going to require investing in human labor and content moderation and customer support, rather than necessarily building yet another technical tool.
Mm-hmm. Before the next question, I'm going to pass along a compliment from Jake Stein, who writes, gratitude, thanks for the screen reader accessible version of the report. And yes, we have responsibilities as an educational institution to ensure that the results of our research are both available to the public, but also available in an accessible way that can be read by screen readers. So Jake asks, did you encounter intersections with disability and the experience of cybersecurity in your workshops?
I can maybe have a shot at answering that. So thank you so much for your question. And I think there was learning points around disability at different points throughout the workshop. I think often accessibility is something that comes out through process. And one learning point for us about cybersecurity and accessibility was when the pandemic kind of hit and lockdowns hit and we moved things online. We initially kind of struggled with it. I mean, obviously, I think everyone was struggling with everything, but as we developed a format for it, we realized that that actually made it more accessible to some people, particularly people who couldn't travel easily. For different reasons, but at the same time, it also made it less accessible to people who don't have good broadband, who maybe don't have a device, like people who wanted to learn more about cybersecurity while we were doing them in kind of community spaces, like the Oxford Community Center could just come even if they didn't have a device and kind of learn about it. So I guess that kind of sort of the different intersections of who we were able to make things accessible to. Similarly, like once we moved online, we were able to make them accessible to people outside of the UK, which I think there's lessons there about how you make cybersecurity knowledge accessible, and that like if you are actually doing the work because you want to help people be safe rather than because you want to show off your knowledge, that needs to be like planning ahead for accessibility and thinking it through needs to be a part of it. I don't know if Scarlett, you have any thoughts?
Well, we have a big list of questions now. So, and I want to make sure that I leave time. Scarlett, would you like to jump in?
No, please, let's get to another question.
So Laura Ship asks, how much of this do you think is about money and selling the idea of cybersecurity to people as individuals? So when you Google it, you get adverts for products that say that'll make you more secure, and many of those services cost money. Does that impact how inclusive we can make cybersecurity? Falami, I wonder from your peer group, from Voice, if you've seen this kind of tension between cybersecurity or information security as something you buy, as opposed to the kinds of hard work and activism that you're doing.
I think the way they sell it, it seems like it's something you need to buy, but very much it's also about having conversations with people, because security is not just about, for me, it's not just about your presence on the internet. It's also about educating people and having those conversations about how you protect yourself and what's right and what's wrong. So there's one way of looking at it. Yeah, this is a hard sell. Let me sell you this to protect yourself. But I think if you're taking ownership for yourself, then it's an individual thing that you need to do in order to try find ways to protect yourself without going through the route of finances or paying out, because not everybody can afford to do it that way. Do you know what I mean? Not everybody can afford to buy a VPN. So, I think we need to be sensible as well as proactive in how we go about doing it. So there's a lot of people, I talk very much about educating people about, sharing your images and what can happen based on my experience and other people's experiences. And that in itself, I do very much, as you know, for free, and financial. And I couldn't even put a financial element on that. And that is basically talking to people about protecting yourself online. And there is no financial cost I can actually add to that, because what I do very much do, and I mean in the sense of financial cost, what I'm saying is by speaking and talking about what's happened to me and supporting other people, I am technically traumatizing myself. Well, I'm not. I mean, a lot of people will see it as re-traumatizing, but for me, it's very much of my healing process. So that in itself, you can't even put a financial element on that, and that is sharing information in order to help others protect themselves by, talking about my experience. So, it depends which way you want to look at it, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Does anybody want to add on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add from the perspective of the workshops that one of the, I suppose it shouldn't have been surprising, but it's a finding that we didn't necessarily think about going into it. A lot of participants talked about their, I guess, the backgrounds of class and wealth as influences of how cybersecurity aware they were. and having gone to a school with good IT lessons, having being able to afford a VPN, it's something that participants were quite mindful of and talked about a lot. I would say that being able to afford cybersecurity tools definitely makes your life a lot, makes digital security a lot easier. It's a lot easier. You can connect to airport Wi-Fi if you have a VPN and just not think about it so much. But it's not, obviously it's not the be all and end all, because you can always just not connect to that airport Wi-Fi. But then we get back into the problem of asking people not to do things just because it's not safe. Whereas maybe those systems and those things should be designed in a way that's safe by default, rather than needing all of these extra tools that sometimes cost money.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just also weigh in on the idea of selling cybersecurity to people, because I think that's such a good point. And I think it is useful context for understanding this kind of frustration that can come up in the way cybersecurity research or industry will talk about users, that often under the guise of the privacy paradox, for example, where people will say, people self-report that they care about privacy, but that they don't actually take actions to support their own privacy. And I think there's a lot of shaming of people for not being good consumers of cybersecurity and downloading password managers, downloading VPNs, having good passwords. And I think that's because you're starting with an idea of what people should be doing to keep systems safe, rather than starting with what people want to be doing to keep themselves safe. And there's a really powerful way to reframe this from Shay Akiwowo at Glitch, and she'll talk about a lot of these digital self-defense practices as a form of digital self-care. And I think that makes it much more relatable and accessible to people. As kind of, but if you're doing digital self-care, you're actually doing something quite different to just having good cybersecurity so that your company doesn't get hacked.
I want to just echo that, because I the idea that we've spent a lot of time and research funds and effort in teaching people how to keep systems safe, not helping people keep themselves safe. And when they're faced with challenges like Falami and Voice work towards, they actually don't get that support from the companies where they're experiencing abuse. I think that's one of the real key takeaways from tonight's event, and what we can learn when we spend time with communities. Speaking of that, there's a question from Andrew Dwyer. How do the findings from the report extend, complicate, or maybe they're distinct to movements to understanding and working with cybersecurity in sites in the global South or in other disadvantaged communities? So how might we connect the findings from this report to those other marginalized communities or communities in the global South?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I'll have a start. So first of all, I'd like to say that the methods that kind of we're drawing on, I don't think it's fully like, so participatory action research is something that originates from the global South, particularly like Latin American like activist researchers who would work with communities to understand the problems they were facing. And I think we drew on those approaches, so on participatory approaches, on action research approaches, but what we were doing is a long shot from, I think, that radical vision of what research could be. And I think one way that manifested, for example, is that I don't like we were starting with our own community, and given that, you know, we are researchers at Oxford, a lot of the people that we were reaching out to and making cybersecurity accessible to are not at all the most marginalized people. The vast majority of people who attended our workshops were from the global North, for example. And so I think there is a lesson for us in the kind of radical origins of participatory action research, of what we want to do better, and what a true version of that would actually mean, which would, first of all, kind of be actively thinking about who is at the margins, like who is the most marginalized from cybersecurity research. Like, for example, yes, sure, women are marginalized, but kind of white women at Oxford are not the most marginalized people from cybersecurity research, evidenced by the fact that we're all essentially in the field. And then working with people in partnership so that they're involved at every single stage of research from the very research design, which is what we were doing. Is we kind of had a research design and then we'd reach out to community partners. Mm-hmm. And we'd reshape those workshops with them, but it's very different to what the kind of radical research methodologies that we were inspired by are.
If I could just add to that really quickly, it may be a little bit of a tangent, but I think that one of the interesting tensions we faced in terms of trying to really go from people's perspectives and get them to set their own priorities for the workshops is that a lot of people would come to the workshops hoping that we would tell them what to do or how to be more secure online, and they were hoping for a little bit more of I suppose, a top-down experience, which we try to avoid where possible. It's very hard. A lot of our tech support people weren't necessarily cybersecurity experts, but Julia and I definitely are very much in that space. And so when you have knowledge about these things, it's hard to remain mindful of the person in front of you, keep empathy at the center of your communication with them, and make sure that you're really asking them what they want to prioritize and what they want to learn. So if these workshops were ever to leave the communities that they were set in for this project, and as we hope extend to more marginalized groups quite intentionally, I think that that's something that we'll have to continue to strive to balance and bear in mind.
One of the questions, I'm going to paraphrase one of the questions from Zoe Firth in the interest of time. So this project was one of citizen science, of research working with community in order to produce research. How might that model progress work in organizations in the space of violence against women and girls and tech-enabled abuse sectors? And I think maybe I turn this first to Falame. What could researchers be doing to help you in your work?
I think that the most important thing for me is to be inclusive and to remember there's not much support for people who've gone through image-based sexual abuse. In the UK, we have the Revenge Porn Helpline, and they very much give short-term emotional support, whereas what I've technically set up is very much a long-term platform, whereas, as I said earlier on, very much most experiences like their content taken down. That's the very first thing you want to do. But then my question is, well, what happens after your content's removed? Mm-hmm. There's a whole emotional turmoil that you go through. It doesn't just go away because you've had your content removed, And then I think, when it comes to me as a person, because voice is very much me, going out there and being able to speak and participate and influence, those are the things where researchers or people who are undertaking research need to be able to be inclusive in that sense that I'm here, obviously my time is very valuable because I work a full-time job, as well as do what I do very voluntary. So it's just about remembering those resources that's here that are working for free and, doing it voluntary, and, just including me, including just including people, and, and not just about including me, because there's a whole platform of people that I support. And I also, in every way possible, I try to include them, some of them very much anonymously, but I include them. So it's not just my voice speaking, it'll be their voices as well. So I think that's something that needs to happen going forward. It would be really helpful.
To build on that, also on kind of citizen science as a methodology in particular, I think one organization that's working on gendered violence that I think is a really interesting example of this is Chain. I think, so yeah, Zoe, who asked the question, I think is from them. The work that you're doing in terms of crowdsourcing cybersecurity advice and centering survivor voices in that crowdsourcing is a form of citizen science, in that the people who are putting together resources, I mean, it's not, and here we get into the kind of like murky details of what is and isn't research, but you're putting together really valuable cybersecurity and security knowledge, and you're doing it with survivor voices from all over the world. And I think that, I mean, if anything, I think you're giving a model for what citizen science in this space could look like. So if that kind of work of compiling people's experiences of both experiencing threats, taking actions to mitigate those threats, and having cybersecurity emerge organically from that, rather than, you know, from someone who has a degree or technical training and who calls themselves a cybersecurity expert. I think citizen science methods would really benefit from that, and would in turn make cybersecurity stronger and more robust.
We're almost out of time, but I want to acknowledge just a couple of points. Monica asks, how can we get the results of this research? And in the follow-up email, you will have a link. All attendees registered for this event will get a link to download the report. And we're making 30 copies available, print copies available for those who email us. And that will be in the follow-up email. But Monica also asks a question I think that follows on really nicely to Zoe's, which is, you know, how can women get involved in this space? What can we do to help? So I think that's both in terms of how can researchers continue to help and support organizations and communities that really need help, but how can we get students like Monica, who's about to graduate, how can we get women involved in the work that needs to be done?
I think that, as Julia said, there are lots of organizations doing really interesting work in this space of trying to think about cybersecurity differently and intervene directly in communities and in sort of an organizational perspective, which it's quite easy to get involved in. They're very open to be reached out to, and they're trying to do similar things to us in the sense that they involve people at every step of the way in terms of deciding what needs to be done and actually doing it. I would say from the perspective of the industry, it's you could apply for cybersecurity jobs. There are a lot of them, and not enough women do apply to them. I think that a lot of work needs to be done around making those spaces more welcoming, though. But I think that needs to happen in parallel. More diverse people need to apply to these spaces, and also recruitment needs to be much more open and welcoming.
Yeah, just to build on that, I know we've been talking a lot about sort of alternative ideas of what counts as cybersecurity, what cybersecurity is, but if you are looking for kind of what a career in what we would conventionally call cybersecurity, absolutely, as Scarlett said, we would definitely encourage you to apply, and I think it'd be great to have more women in these spaces. It's still one of the industries where women are quite underrepresented. In terms of practical advice, I'd really recommend the Facebook group Women in Cybersecurity. It's yet another one of these kind of really supportive, caring online spaces where a lot of people are pouring in a lot of labor into really good advice on which trainings to take, which courses, advice on how to navigate interviews. So I know maybe you're already on it, but that's one thing I'd recommend to anyone looking to start a career in this. And also, if you're thinking about sort of cybersecurity and women, there's a Nature article from a while back called Cybersecurity Needs Women. And I think in terms of how you frame yourself, there's just a set of experiences that are really lacking, that can lead to a lot of groupthink in the field when the field expresses a really narrow idea of who counts as a cybersecurity expert. And I think you can really leverage that. But yeah.
That's great. We're going to have to close now. I want to thank all of you who have taken time on a Wednesday, on a Thursday. It's a Zoom. We're all in crazy time. Here in Oxford, it is raining and dark. Hopefully, it is better and more pleasant where you are. Thank you again. Thanks to our panelists. Thanks to our amazing events team. And at this point, I would like to turn it back to the events team in order to give our wrap up. Thank you all again for joining us this evening.
Thank you for a fascinating insight today, and thank you all for attending. You will receive a follow-up email in due course. The OII are hosting their next Wednesday webinar on the 10th of February at 6 p.m. UK time. Professor Victoria Nash will host Tristan Harris, co-founder of the Centre for Humane Technology and former Google design ethicist. Please visit the events page on the OII website to sign up. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.